Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm not a native speaker and I had to prepare many pages of my presentation, but I hope that it will be much more fun and boring. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation for the great opportunity that will celebrate Mendel's anniversary. I decided to tell you stories not about Mendel, but about the people that influenced him or played an important role during his rediscoveries and resurrection to being one of the big fathers of life sciences. The name of my presentation is Preserving the Legacy of Mendel. And my speech will be about Hugo Iltis, Jaroslav Kříženecký, and about Vítězslav Orel. Firstly, we are going to Brno about 1865. After that, we will jump to 1905, and we will go through the turbulent times of the First Republic, meaning Czechoslovakia, from their independence in 1918 to 1938, via Reichsprotektorat Böhmen und Mähren, to the communist period, and we will finish in the Czech Republic. All parts of our history are represented by different people, scientists that are focused on one interest, Gregor Mendel. Life is not known as well as many others. His opinions and views are still hidden. What kind of source do we have? We have information from his letters to his family, to colleagues, further biographies from Hugo Iltis, Oswald Richter, Jaroslav Kříženecký, Vítězslav Orel, and eventually Jan Klein. The lives of three of them, Kříženecký, Iltis, and Orel, are great evidence of the time in which they lived. We have to realize that knowledge about Mendel didn't come from the sky. It is the record of the handwork of these men. We are celebrating 150 years from his lectures. Mendel's theory was so different from all others during his time. What do we know about the 2 days that changed the history of life sciences? I apologize for few words, but Mendel delivered 2 lectures about his research on peace. It was in the afternoon time. The temperature in Brno was, on the first lecture, minus 7.5 degrees of Celsius and half a degree of Celsius for the second lecture. Mendel came from Old Brno Monastery. It's building in the... is there any pointer?
No, I don't think so. No.
Is the building in the left? Oh, sorry, in the from your view, left corner. And Mendel came from Old Brno Monastery to Janská Street. You saw the picture in Simon's presentation. He came from Abbey via Biker Street and Cabbage Market to the school for the meeting of Natural History Society. All information about Mendel is a little bit hazy. His lectures are in a similar situation. Every meeting at the society was documented, not for Mendel's lectures. The audience was very surprised. The Brno newspaper Neuigkeiten published a short notice. Prelate Mendel gave a lecture at the society meeting and he discussed the problematic of inheritance. And this is the part of the proceedings of Natural History Society in Brno. This is only one sentence about Mendel's lecture. Prelate Mendel gave the lecture about plant hybridization. He experienced bitter times after failing his exams, but he found the strength to start a huge research project. He was not alone. He discussed the work with Baruch Plaček. Plaček was the son of the rabbi, and he became a rabbi too. He was interested in botany and life sciences in general. And when Mendel went to London in 1862, He cared for his garden and supervised the gardeners in the abbey. This Catholic friar trusted so much to this upcoming rabbi. And we know that Rabbi Plaček was the first who understood Mendel's theory, probably. I jump now to 1884. Mendel passed away. In one of the obituaries was written, his research on plants was an epoch. Mendel was forgotten, but not so much as we think. Research was still alive in Negeli's group of students. There are pictures with Hieracium plants from Mendel's research. He sent it to Negeli during his research about 1869, and it still exists in herbarium in Grenoble. And this is the Negeli's group. On the top, Mendel and Negeli, they corresponded about Mendel's research on hawkweeds. Korenz was one of them, the students, and it's not surprising that Mendel was found independently by Korenz. Čermák, the doctoral advisor, was again Karl von Negeli, and his uncle taught Mendel in Vienna and De Vries. From your left side, the picture of Karl Korenz in the middle row, Čermák, and the third is Arno Dodel-Porter. He was the student of Karl Negeli too, and this man was teacher of one of Mendel's biographers, Hugo Iltis. All three men played a big role in development in genetics, together with Mendel's friend Bateson. He's in the middle under the picture of Mendel. His rediscovery as a man came from different circles, from Iltis and Mendel's nephews. Mendel, picture of Hugo Iltis is in the middle, in the third row. And this is, for your information, the life and the data about lives of Gregor Mendel, Hugo Iltis, Jaroslav Kříženecký, another Mendel's biographer, and Vítězslav Orel. Hugo Iltis corresponded with Jaroslav Kříženecký, and they discussed the questions about Mendel's legacy. And Vítězslav Orel was a student of Jaroslav Kříženecký. Who was Hugo Iltis? Hugo Iltis is probably the most important person in Mendel's rediscovery. He was born in Brno on April 11, 1882, 2 years before Mendel's death, to Moritz and Charlotte Iltis family. His father had a public role as a municipal doctor. Hugo was the oldest child. He had two sisters, Frederica and Katy, and the younger brother Karl, who died in Piasky concentration camp. The Iltis family were German Jews. He studied at the German gymnasium in Brno, and after that he went to Switzerland, where he studied at the University of Zurich. He spent 3 years at the university, and he worked as the assistant of Arno Dodel-Porter. Meeting with this man changed Iltis' view on science, and it is supposed that Dodel introduced Mendel's theory to him. Dodel-Porter was a student of Carl Wilhelm von Negeli. Yes, that Negeli that corresponded with Mendel. Mendel wrote 9 letters to Negeli, and he wanted to share information from his research on hawkweeds, which he sought after his crucial research on peace. Iltis studied at Charles University in Prague from 1903 to 1905 under Hans Molisch, who was the teacher of the second Mendel's biographer Oswald Richter. He returned to Brno, and in 1906 he was a secretary for Naturforscherverein in Brno, means Natural History Society in Brno. which was the society through which Gregor Mendel published his papers. In 1910, he raised funds for the Mendel Memorial in Brno, and he was a secretary for International Committee for the Mendel Memorial. He gave the commemorative speech at the unveiling of the memorial. He was also the secretary for the Mendel Centenary in 1922, a celebration of the 100th anniversary of Mendel's birth. He was a professor of biology at Deutsches Gymnasium in Brno from 1905 to 1938, and Privatdozent of botany and genetics in Deutsche Technische Hochschule, German Polytechnical Institute, from 1911 to 1938. He was the founder and the director of the Masaryk People's University. This is the picture of the building, and was adult education evening school, and the Volkshochschule, this Masaryk People University, was the largest institution for adult education in Czechoslovakia, with an enrollment of about 2,000 students. He founded and curated the Mendel Museum in Brno in 1932 to 1937. The museum contained many valuable manuscripts and relics of the life and work of Mendel. A socialist, Iltis spent much of the time from 1930 to 1938 combating the racist biology, eugenics of the Nazis. Iltis was a German, and after the First World War, supported German culture in Czechoslovakia, but very early understood Hitler's fearsome theories. He corresponded with Bateson, famous geneticist, Czech politician, poet and writers. He loved Czechoslovakia, but he was very disappointed after the end of the Second World War. The Czech nationalists banished the rest of Germans from Czechoslovakia. They gathered all Germans in Brno, and they had to go by foot from Brno to Vienna. The main group consists of older people and children, and one of those people was Iltis' mother. She died after 40 kilometers from Brno from uterine exhaustion and was buried in a mass grave. It was very painful for him, and I saw changes of his interest in his diaries. He wrote about the situation in Czechoslovakia before. After that, he wrote about his life in Virginia and about collecting of minerals. Iltis emigrated to the USA in 1939 with his wife, Annie Iltis, and their two boys, with the help of Franz Boas and Albert Einstein. He caught the last plane to London, and he stayed there, and his family came to USA by boat. Initially, he taught for 5 weeks at the international school run by Peter Ogen. Following a chance meeting with Dean Alvey, he was offered a job and became professor of biology at Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg. There were, he taught for approximately 12 years, and he was founder and curator of genetics. Visited at the Illinois archives. He died in Fredericksburg, Virginia on June 1955. His younger son is the plant morphologist and taxonomist Hugo Iltis. His elder son was the entomologist Fred Iltis. His younger son served in the US Army and was a member of the unit that investigated Nazis after the Second World War. He spent many years in Europe and met Professor Kříženecký in Brno, and I'm going to talk about him after. Fred was a socialist much more than the younger Hugo, and for this reason Fred served in the US Army in the Pacific area near Japan. Later in life, to his great surprise, he learned from his wife's sisters, Lizzie Lipscher, that his wife Annie Iltis was a distant cousin of Gregor Mendel. The second person is Jaroslav Kříženecký. The life story of Professor Kříženecký is an absurd drama. For an explanation of his life, I have used his handwritten autobiography, which I have appended from other sources. He was born in Prague on February 2nd, 1869. His father was a professor of architecture at the Technical University. He had 3 younger sisters, and as he wrote, "That was the reason why I was a self-made man. I didn't have any support for myself." His parents decided to send him to Realschule because they studied there, and it was a great opportunity for the development of his technical skills. Fortunately, he met Professor Robal, an enthusiastic entomologist who opened Kříženecký's mind to life sciences. He published his first article about beetles during his studies at high school, but increased his scale of interest very soon. He continued with studies on insects, but shifted from taxonomy to physiology, insect abnormalities to general biology. He knew very well that his life would be connected with biology. He was part of the subjects at the Faculty of Philosophy. We are speaking about time before the First World War. The second choice was studying at the Faculty of Agriculture. He didn't have any interest in practical agriculture, but he decided to study at this faculty. He was lucky when he met Professor Růžička from the General Biology Department of the Faculty of Medicine of Charles University. Professor Růžička noticed his interest and great skills and knowledge in biology and offered him to be a volunteer in his department. His studies were interrupted by the First World War. Kříženecký had to fight and was injured, a gunshot to his stomach. He sent postcards to his supervisor with consideration on sexual differentiation after his return back to Prague. His army career finished in 1919 when he was demobilized. He worked on the postcards was used as his thesis for his PhD, which he obtained the same year. In 1921, he moved to Brno to the brand new Agriculture University. He became an associate professor, and his new boss was a man from practical agriculture, and their views were very different. Kříženecký was getting into disputes with him. He was on this position for only 1 year. After that, he became the head of the new Research Institute of Animal Technologies. He hoped to escape from his boss, but he became the director of all institutes. He increased his role in the scientific community after 1930. He worked in the fields of fisheries and animal productivity. He was a lecturer at the Czech Technical University and at the Chemical University, and became the director of the Institute of Fisheries and Hydrobiology. At this time, he started his research in the field of genetics. He understood the importance of genetics in animal breeding and seeking the heredity basics of traits. He visited many countries on his business trips and spent 1 year at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory on a Rockefeller scholarship. His life and work in the USA left its huge trace in his reasoning on research and using modern methods in biology. His life during the Second World War was very influenced. Nazis closed all units very soon after 1939, and he supported the resistance and was a member of an illegal unit. He was imprisoned twice, 1943 and in 1945, till the end of the war. He wrote, "That was pure luck. I could have passed away in a concentration camp." Bad years came after the Second World War. His former boss wanted to destroy his career. He was from the Research Institute and from the university, a surrectionist and Mendelism follower. He fell ill and was placed on a disability pension. He was asked to help the Slovakia Academy of Science the next year, and he worked there for 4 years. In 1957, he wrote an article against Lysenko's theories. The next years, he was sentenced to 8 months. He had a 3-year-old son. Now he's retired and he's 60, and he has given me information for this lecture. His article, Why I'm Not a Communist, didn't help him, of course. He wrote it in 1925 and explained why collectivism is dangerous for the development of human beings. His fight against the Lysenko was not the main reason of his arrest. He was framed for a combination for revolution in science for his efforts to set up the scientific methods and university education, which he saw in the USA. His health worsened after his stay in prison, and he had bigger problems with his stomach. That was first step to cancer that killed him. He got an offer from the Moravian Museum to establish a new Mendel Museum in 1960. He started with systematic work on Mendel's legacy. He contacted Iltis and wrote him a letter with all his plans. His main aim was to celebrate Mendel's anniversary in 1965. He invited his student Orel to help. He knew that he had problems with his job because he had defended Mendel and his work against Lysenko supporters in Czechoslovakia. Unfortunately, the cancer was faster. He died in December 1964, a few months before the huge event under the auspices of UNESCO. The event restored genetics in Eastern Europe, bloc countries. Kříženecký was the author of more than 600 articles, 20 books, and many popularizing lectures. His book, Fundamenta Genetica, was one of the basic genetics books in Czechoslovakia for the 60s and 70s. And his follower was Vítězslav Orel. He died this summer, and Orel was born on 29th of May 1926 in a small village near Brno, and he studied at the gymnasium in Kyiv. He had a very close connection to agriculture because he had to help his farming family. He decided to study at Agriculture University in Brno, where he met Professor Kříženecký. He told me, I met an incredible man. I stopped him after his lecture about genetics and asked for his cooperation. He said only, how many languages do you know? I said, German, French, and Latin. And he answered, it's good, but for the genetics, you need English. And I worked very hard and I learned English. He finished his studies in 1949, and he worked in the Research Institute for Milk and Eggs and became the director in 1953. In this time, Lysenkism came to the countries under Russians' influence, to countries on the east of the Iron Curtain. Kříženecký became the head of a new department of the Moravian Museum called Mendelianum, Mendel Museum. He invited Orel for collaboration on the important aim, to promote Mendel. Kříženecký died in 1964, and Orel continued as the head of the department until 1991. Orel was the most important person in the rescue of Mendel's name. He founded a new journal, Folia Mendeliana, which was during his time one of the best journals belonging to history of science topics related to Mendel. He collaborated with scientists worldwide, from the USA to Russia. He published in many foreign countries and published the first paper about Mendel in Czech. His main research topics were the history of cultivation in Moravia, the role of Comenius on education in Silesia, and the role of Purkyně and his contacts in Brno. This is a shortened version of the branch of his research called the History of Cultivation in Moravia. If we want to learn what led Mendel to his research in the field of heredity, we leave the romantic notion of a monk that at odd hours crossbred garden peas, and we have to go many years back. Brno was a modern and expanding Central European city. The textile industry played a great part in it, and people were hungry for education. The main person that contributed to the development of natural sciences in Moravia was Christian Karl André. This well-known scientist came to Brno in 1798 from Saxony. He was the secretary of the Moravian Economic Society, and in 1814 he became secretary of the Society of Sheep Breeders, which he founded. The society concentrated on wool production for the developing textile industry, which was the main industry in Brno. One of the nicknames for Brno was Moravian Manchester. Andrej's interest in cultivation led to the foundation of the Pomology Society, which concentrated on elaborating methods to cultivate varieties of fruit trees and grape vines. A certain impulse that brought André to his interest in sheep breeding was the success of the breeder Robert Bakewell. By crossing between relatives with selected parental couples, he managed to breed stock with half the weight but a doubled weight of flesh. The success of this method led to the increased quality and amount of fleece. To reach a higher quality fleece is much more demanding, and the only farmer that was successful was a Moravian. He was Ferdinand Geisler. Andrei exchanged letters with many people. He was supported in this activity by a tolerant chancellor, Prokop Lažanský. But Lažanský left his office, and due to police surveillance, Andrei left for Stuttgart. Before he left, he told his son to write a book on sheep breeding using the knowledge of the best breeding school of the Moravian breeder František Geisler. While in Brno, Andrei asked to G.C.L. Hempel, a member of London Horticulture Society, to explain to the members of the Pomology Society the use of plant pollination in order to reach more productivity varieties. In his papers for the Moravian Economic Society, Hempel pointed out the necessity of a knowledge of hybridization. He thought that the discoverer of this law had to have great patience, a profound knowledge of botany, and an observant eye. When Professor Johann Karl Nestler joined the university in Olomouc, and Professor Franz Diebel, the Philosophical Institute in Brno, a significant improvement in the scientific knowledge of heredity principle was made. In his lecture on natural history and agriculture studies, Nestler also taught plant and animal breeding. In 1839, he published an extensive study called Heredity in Sheep Breeding. He was one of the first people to say that nature creates natural varieties without any activity of man, but man is able, by controlling the reproductive cycle and creating fertile modified organisms, to simulate this process. Later, independently of it, Charles Darwin elaborated on this subject. Professor Diebel, under whom Mendel did his studies, described the technique of artificial pollination as the main method for breeding new varieties of commodities. And this is the certificate from Franz Diebel, when Mendel studied pomology in Brno. František Cyril Knap, abbot of the Augustinian order in Brno, was a significant member of the Pomology Society. He knew Nestler and Diebel very well. He understood well the complexity and importance of heredity principles. In the meeting of the society in 1836, he suggested that trait transmission from the producing down to the produced should become an object of physiological research. In 1837, as one of the first, he introduced the scientific problem and the requirement to find out what and how it is inherited. 6 years later, Abbot Knapp accepted Mendel as a novice in the Augustinian order. Very soon, Mendel started to do his research, and after his agriculture studies with Professor Diebel and mathematics, physics, and plant physiology in Vienna, he started his experiments with garden peas in Brno. In 1865, Mendel delivered his results in the meeting of Natural History Society in Brno. Its attendants didn't understand that he was explaining a scientific problem that had already been pronounced by Abbot Knapp 30 years earlier. We have to thank these three men. They work as one soul, showed Mendel as a genius that wanted to live his life in connection with research. Finally, I would like to add few sentences and increase the view of Mendel as a man who lived in God. We repeat all Mendel's work. He wanted peace because he wanted to know the principles of inheritance for breeding, but the traits of daughter generations' successors. He bred bees without stings. He helped beekeepers. He used meteorological phenomena to forecast weather because he wanted to help farmers. The reason of Mendel's entrance to the order. He solved the problems with his life and with collateral living, but his life in the order showed Mendel to us as a man that worshipped God and lived in pure Christianity. His successors were examples of strict men that lived in word of science and in straight attitudes. They were not afraid of the consequences of their work. They tried to live in truth, as did Mendel. We cannot forget it, and they should become the prototype for our scientific work, and in the same view as a human. Thank you.